Hello, welcome back, everyone. Seems more people are incoming as we speak. There are a couple of items that I added for the agenda for today, but they all depend on, both of them depend on Rajat from Microsoft being here, so I don't think we can start with those yet. So instead, maybe we'll do the usual status. Let's start with Young today. Any updates you want to share on VC, Young?
Not much. So we are working on more customer representative workloads like Nginx, and Kafka, and also Terrasort, etc. We're also looking at some of the Google micro benchmarks, and yeah, that's it.
No, thanks for that. I'm also going to ask, like, I'm kind of curious on the status of the output implementation. Is that fully done right now, or are there still missing bits?
Um, I wouldn't say it's fully done, but we don't have any consumer yet. I'm working with Google engineer like Sergey from Google, but until someone consumes it and says it looks okay, I don't think I can claim that's like finished.
Okay, so I would also say, because at some point this will become useful. So if you don't have a consumer right now to actually exercise that, you could use the validator tool and push that output through the validator and see that is.
Yes, I haven't done that.
Okay, got it. All right. Thanks for the update, Young. Next up, Igor. We cannot hear you, Igor. You're not muted on Zoom, but no audio.
Oh, it was an internal mute, apparently. Yeah, so I don't have anything to report, but so I updated my discussion item that I created on GitHub. I want to wrap a utility, open source utility for RS-232 testing. Though my management insists that we need to do it using internal tools. So I probably cannot promise that it will be delivered as an OCP diag. So I'm not sure about this now.
I see. Okay. Thanks for the update. I think if you can, I'm not sure if you added something to the discussion. I remember seeing an update, but I didn't get to read it yet. But if you could add a bit to the discussion on the RS-232 diag, to post this update there as well.
Oh yeah, I posted it there. I mean, update like what?
What you just said with
Oh yeah, sure. I'll post it.
The internal tooling.
Once we decide on this, I'll post what the outcome is.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Hua, or Hua, maybe I'm mispronouncing your name. Do we have any update on the output spec on the LMP tool? I don't know if you've had any discussion with Satish in the meantime.
All our discussion after that meeting was on the GitHub discussion. So there's some back and forth there. I don't think there's really a contradiction between our proposals, but just there's we like you've been chiming in on what's going on. So I want to see if the one approach that I proposed work. Basically, say we want to use the name to specify the format of to identify the format of the subline, like the the location of the subcomponent, whatever that is. So we can talk about it later if you have time.
I see. There's a couple of replies on this discussion that I haven't read yet. There's one from you and one from Satish. Okay, so in that case, I'll reply on the GitHub discussion, and we can continue there. Okay, thanks for the update. Also, let me know, is it Hua or Hua? How do you actually pronounce it?
I'm not hearing the difference. So also to me, yeah.
Okay. So if there's no difference, then it's only in my head. Okay, cool. Okay then. Next up, I would ask Vincent. You just joined a couple of minutes ago. Do you have any updates on what's going on with the was it this week or next week?
I'm traveling next week. By the way, I also did not hear the difference. You said it very beautifully, Adrian. You know, I say Hua, and I hope I'm getting it right. I'm traveling to Taiwan next week. I think the making of this in terms of the contributions that we will see from our dear design manufacturers is going to be somewhat slower than in the making, because there's an element of understanding how to contribute, and maybe in the initial parts there may be some collaboration that isn't visible to the OCP forum in the early stages, until actually the model refines and there are these public contributions. So I think it is just what I'm saying is it might only get visible to the larger forum a little later than we'd like, but it is in the works, and so that's why I wanted to provide the update. And I don't see Marcos here because I do know that Marcos has been pursuing very similar threads, but yeah, hopefully more on this in a few weeks, at least on a debrief of what came up.
Okay, thank you. Next up, maybe Venkat. I know I don't see Rajat on the call, so if you have any updates that do not relate to CTAM right now, that would work.
Yeah, so I think my updates are the test drive. I'm still targeting end of this month, March, for an initial release, and the autoval is also going on pretty well as far as I see. So those two should be on track. I did have a few questions for Rajat on the CTAM and how we should kind of maintain the merge, like the branching and the merging kind of policies. But I think I'll wait for him to come join in the next call.
All right. Maybe, we can probably still talk a bit about that after we finish with the status, because I would find it useful to get a general consensus of the development process for all of these repos that are currently owned by OCP TV.
Sounds good.
Okay. So I think last on my screen would be Giovanni. I don't know, do you want to share any updates on the Rust API? I know we have some work ongoing there.
Yeah. So essentially, the POC that pretty much is like 80% of the work has been done. So yes, next week we will review that together, just to be sure that all the possible implementation in Rust has been done in the right way. And I'm planning to create some macros just to make simpler from the developer point of view to logging stuff. So I think we are on a good track to share that with the other participants here. and especially with Igor from Google that was interested, that started the idea of a video Rust library. And so I think probably, I don't know if next week or the other one, there could be good news about that package. And yes, then we will continue from there, probably on GitHub or anywhere else we will contribute together.
Sounds good. Thanks for the update, Giovanni. If you could confirm for me, please. We are planning on open sourcing this whole bit, right? So it would be like on the same level with the Python API, for example.
Yep, yeah, that is the plan.
Okay, and have you considered the maintenance mechanism inside this group if we publish that as an OCP TV project?
Not yet. We will do that before sharing all the work that has been done.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we'll discuss that internally first, and then we'll share things here. Okay. Cool. Well, I think that's all for the status. If I missed anyone, please let me know. In the meantime, I was mentioning that there's no stuff on the agenda for today, but maybe we can. Like there's a discussion that we haven't finished last week with the steps being run in parallel. I know we have like less people today, so I don't know if we should start on that first. Maybe we can do the dev process on the general repos. So Venkat, can you give a bit of context on what this topic is?
Yeah, so this primarily pertains to where we kind of send pull requests to in the OCP CTAM library. So OCP CTAM GitHub. Right now, the model is we have a separate developer branch for each of the contributors. Like, so there's a developer NVIDIA, developer Google, right? Like developer Microsoft, and yeah, I think each company kind of maintains their own branch, and then they send their pull requests, merge it upstream, and then at some point, I think Rajat like basically merges them into developer. Now, as Meta is also starting to kind of make contributions, like I think our thing is like if we start doing that with a developer Meta, then we're also kind of taking up the double work, right? Like so once we had to merge into developer, but then we also constantly rebase developer Meta on top of developer, right? Like, so I was just wondering, from a simplification of the workflow, should we just always send our feature branches to developer? That's the first part. The second part is the release process, right? Like right now, there's not any significant code in the main. So I wanted to kind of see hear from Microsoft like how they're thinking of the cadence of releasing from developer into main, and so that like internal CI, we can push it into PyPy, and then internally we can consume it from PyPy. So those are the two kind of topics of discussion.
Right. Thanks, Venkat. So I would say before we continue this, I'm thinking of asking for other opinions of how dev processes are working. So, for example, we have virtual clients with Yang, and we have a new repo for the Google LMT tool from Hua. I'm kind of wondering. So, for example, Yang, what is your process in the Git repo of pushing new features? Like, do you follow a standard Git flow, for example, or is there something custom?
We completely follow that. So for internals, we the only difference is for people outside of Microsoft, you will need to fork, and for inside of Microsoft, you can work in the same repo. That's the only difference. And for releasing, we have a automation to test every workload that we support. So like in open source, I think we have like 42, like about 40 workloads, and internal there's like about 20 to 30. That's comparative to Microsoft, or what we need to pay. And we test these workloads in an automatic way. And once we confirm there's a version and every workload works as expected, and we see the data, then we announce a release. That's we try to aim for once a month, but sometimes longer, sometimes shorter.
And is this testing? So my first question is, the resources for the testing, are those internal to Microsoft, or is it something that you can do in GitHub Actions, for example, with the VMs that they use?
It's too much for GitHub Actions. For example, some of the workloads need specific GPU cards, so we just use Azure VM for that. Yes, they are internal, but they don't have to be. They just need to be a VM with these cards that we need. But like someone needs to pay for that, and so right now it's internal to Microsoft that we use Azure VM to test those.
Okay, and is the test running on GitHub and remotely using these resources internally, or is the testing running internally and then you push to GitHub?
No, the testing, the whole testing is done by an internal A/B test system. So we even do A/B testing for virtual client itself, and then once we see every workload is working, we manually snap a commit as release.
I see. Okay. Thanks for the explanation. Now, I also mentioned you. I know the repo with your version of the LMT tool is quite new. But do you have a dev process in mind already, or?
No, honestly, I don't. Yeah, I haven't thought about like what's the requirement. What like can you give me an example? Like what process?
No. So the question right now is, I'm trying to do like this small poll based on the people in the call, to figure out what the existing methodologies are.
Okay.
And if you don't have one for that repo, then that's completely fine. We can discuss options right now. Like, this is the point of this discussion, to figure out some guidance into how this would work for the OCP TV managed repos.
Okay.
Right.
So currently, so far internally, it has been this tool is used in different phases of production on bench and in manufacturing data center. It's what people who use it just use what it offers. Okay, if it's some they need something, the request will come to me and I'll develop it accordingly. So that's pretty much yeah.
Okay.
So I haven't really got any other contribution like pull request yet. Yeah.
I see. So it's a bit more ad hoc, as it were. Okay, got it. So then I'll get back to. Oh, maybe I should ask Arun as well. Arun, on the OSFCI, what kind of dev methodology do you use on the open source bit?
You mean the licensing?
No. The how you make releases, how you push new codes, general code management in on the open source side.
We have guidelines for the pull requests, and when they come through, it gets reviewed by the existing core team, and then we test it on the systems that we have. And then, of course, that once that cycle is complete, And if everything goes well, it gets merged.
And is this testing manual?
Yes, it is manual because it would require, especially if you're changing the binaries, it would require you to swap out things on the running servers, restart the EM100s, because it's all real hardware. And if you look at the code base, we don't have too much of automated unit tests yet.
I see. Okay. Thanks for the details. Okay, so the point of this this poll, ad hoc poll that that just happened was trying to figure out, and everyone here in the call to hear what the existing methodologies are. So I'll get back to you, Venkat. What would you say are the current issues or challenges with the way that repo works with the branches and all of that? Like,
Yeah.
what are we trying to solve here?
Yeah, I think the primary challenge as I see it is kind of I mean, having to do this merge twice, right? Like once into developer and then again rebasing your own branch. So if we had one source of truth where all the pull requests go to for the upstream, then that makes it easy. You don't have to kind of rebase, right? Like that's one challenge. The other challenge is also kind of how often we make the releases into main. And how do we kind of sync our internal code, right? Like the maintainer makes a determination of what is a release and significant enough, right? So yeah, that's something that'll be good to have a guidance around, kind of our release process and how we should set up our own CI, so we can get the OCP tags into our respective company code bases. So
Okay, thank you. So what I was discussing this bit with Venkat earlier as well, and I think I'm gonna make a proposal and like subjective to critique here in the group. So the reason why I'm mentioning Git flow is because I think this model would work for the repos that we maintain in the group here. It's already in place for a couple of them, OCP diag set, I think has it. So basically what's happening is there's a bunch of scripts that define GitHub actions. And there is a script that does automated testing. That the goal of that is to qualify a release for being valid and correct for releasing. And the other script is actually building and publishing. Specifically, what I'm talking about here with building and publishing is with PyPy, but it doesn't necessarily need to be limited to PyPy. And in very short format for people that may not be aware of Git flow, Git flow assumes that there's a couple of named branches with particular semantics. So for example, there's the main branch on a repo, which is long-lived. And there's a dev branch, which is also long-lived. And whenever a bug fix or a feature or new code needs to be added to the code base, there's the idea is to make a branch out of the dev branch, push new commits on it for that feature, for example, and then merge it back into dev. So the dev branch, the head of the dev branch always has the bleeding edge code. And for the release process, basically, we merge the dev branch into main, maybe through an intermediate branch of a release, but that's a detail. And this merge commit on main automatically triggers the publish script so that everything gets built and published, for example, to PyPy as a stable artifact. So this is like a very short description of what Git flow looks like. So my question right now is, does anyone have concerns about following this model, generally speaking, in the repos that we maintain in the group?
How does tagging work or versioning?
So versioning, okay, I'll go into the detail that I avoided earlier. So the dev,
I guess, but is it a manual process? Like we create a tag and the process builds everything, or is it an automated? I think that's all I really.
It is a manual process. So the tagging specifically is manual. So you would do git tag, your version number. The reason why I am saying manual in this case is because the maintainer who makes the release for that specific repo is the entity to know how you would increment the version. So generally speaking, if we refer to semver versioning, which is very popular, you would need to know, okay, over the last while, since the last release, have any API breaking PRs reached into the dev branch? And if so, you need to know that you're going to increase the major version, right? If that's not the case, then maybe you increase the minor or patch version. So that's why I find that there's a need to do this manually. Although that's the only manual bit, like the tagging and pushing a commit. The actual publish and building and all of that is a GitHub action, so there's nothing to do there.
Any concerns about there being the need to have different kind of main branches, and how we would handle that sort of case? But if we just have a single main branch, so we make some architectural change or drastic breaking change, and so there's we're now on to version 1.3, and if I'm on a 2 and I need a feature, I'm no longer able to pull a main. I now need to figure out how we handle the kind of support for the previous generation, if you want to call it that.
Okay. Again, I'll go into the detail that I avoided earlier. So because this question requires it. So the actual process of making a release is from the dev branch, another release branch is forked, right? And on this release branch, you set in the new version number. That's the first commit on it. This release branch is then meant to be merged into main, which provides the stable. But if we need to support multiple major versions, I understand that's your question, then the release branch that was tracking the previous major version, for example, that would be used to add more stuff and maybe do a manual release out of it. And the main branch will always have like the latest major version. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's exactly the answer I was hoping for. Thank you.
All right, cool. Yes, Vincent?
Hey, Adrian. First of all, I apologize. I've been very distracted this morning with other things, so I may not have paid attention. One question on this Git flow: is the proposal across all the repos that we manage, being OCP Diag core and every Diag? So is this kind of what you're aiming for?
Yes.
Is on the Diags themselves, what singles out one of the dev branches? And I apologize if you've covered that, but if you take a case like CTAM that has multiple dev branches, what then triggers the what we're going to call stable? How do we use Git flow? Or is this a manual process of tagging which one is going to eventually be merged? Because I do see a landscape where we are going to be a little bit in a landscape of many branches, dev branches that different companies or different individuals will fork. So essentially, my question is, how involved do we get in saying this is going to be the stable going forward?
Right. So that is actually the question that all of this started from.
Yeah.
Semantically speaking, and I'm gonna thank Karen for taking the notes, because we don't have Rajat on the call, and this is relevant for him as well as maintainer of that repo. So in my opinion, semantically speaking, having those multiple dev branches for different companies, different whatever reason, that is identical to having multiple repos. A single repo should have a single dev branch and a single main branch, which track, as I said, the latest bleeding edge codes and the latest stable release. Those are the semantics. Having multiple dev branches, for whatever reason, implies that at some point you need to merge those dev branches into the dev general branch without any differentiator. And the main issue with this is GitHub works with PRs as the unit of review. So in a normal Git flow mechanism, for example, where you would have like a new feature branch, this is a very short-lived branch that has like a bunch of commits on it, and then it gets merged back into dev by virtue of a PR. So at this point, you have a couple of commits on the PR branch that get reviewed in merging back in dev. When you have multiple dev branches, which are very long-lived, two things happen. One is you need to periodically pull from the dev branch into this other branch to get any updates that someone else may have made on the dev branch that you don't have. And the other thing has to happen as well. You need to merge from your dev branch to the general dev branch. And this is kind of problematic, because you can, ideally, you would do this with a PR, because to merge into the dev branch, the general semantic is that you need a PR to be reviewed, right, by the maintainer or maintainer team. But since this separate dev branch is long-lived, this PR is likely to have thousands to tens of thousands of lines of code. So that is going to be completely untenable in reviewing all of that code. So what can happen because of that is what Venkat found this week, which is on the CTAM repo, the dev branch is actually broken and doesn't compile. Because as a side effect of having too much to review, you basically don't review anything and just click accept. Everything gets put into the dev branch without any testing. Well, in this case, testing is also missing. Maybe testing would have caught this. But basically the problem is the review is completely ignored because it's untenable. So that's how you get a broken branch. So yeah, the whole point of this discussion is to have a consensus on what development process model we actually use in all of these repos that we have to maintain. And ideally, we use the same for all of them, because if we need to, if we end up having a very heterogeneous landscape of how do you work on this repo, how do you work on this other one, it's not efficient, right? Go ahead.
Thanks, Adrian, and I appreciate sort of if you circle back on what has already been said. One thing in this process, which sounds very very logical. I mean, very. I'm not going to say standard because maybe it's not a standard, but there is one element that I think we may need to refine, and that is the fork. That and what guidance are we going to provide around a forked project? Because I do anticipate the lowest barrier of entry for most companies and individuals will be to actually just branch off a diag. And because for them, it's probably going to be the lowest friction to use the diag. The inviting contribution always presents some overhead, right? Because there's engineering overhead in everything you described, from merging and passing back and discussion. So maybe one consideration in the guidance we provide is also around what you said, that look, if you want to do work in a standalone fashion, here's the fork. And then the question for us is, do we want to be tracking those forks? Like if somebody goes off and finds value in the fork in memtest or in SAT, that they fork it, do we want to be keeping track of those forks within the space of OCP, the OCP diag forum?
Right. So I have an answer to that, but I am also inviting everyone on the call. If you have an opinion, please go ahead. So on the forking aspect, we need to differentiate between branching as forking and forking the whole repo. The branching aspects we kind of already discussed. Semantically, these two, at the end of the day, are not that different. We should avoid having, in this dev model, long running branches, apart from the ones that are qualified to do so, like the dev and the main branch. That being said, if people want to fork a whole repo and work on that, things don't change that much. The forked repo. So on GitHub, you can do PRs between branches in the same repo, or you can do PRs between branches in different repos. So with a forked repo, you continue on the forked dev branch, so your local clone, as it were. You push some commits, and then you say, okay, I want to make a PR between the branch on my forked repo against the upstream repo dev branch. Again, the PR is against the dev branch. So whether it's from a local branch or from a remote branch from a different repo, both PRs are against the dev branch. And the same model applies. Like you would have like some amount of code to review, and that gets merged into the dev branch, and then the fork needs to pull from the remote upstream into the fork any updates that may have appeared. You don't want to use the word standard, but for GitHub, this is kind of standard. This is the forking model for GitHub. That being said, the fork technically has a long-lived dev branch by itself. So in this case, the general recommendation, if it would be called like that, is when you make a PR, you as the maintainer need to make sure that your PR is okay, it is acceptable. There's been a lot of cases, and this still happens in a lot of repos, where yes, someone makes a fork, then continues developing on it for like 3 months, and then pushes back a PR, and the PR gets immediately rejected because it's like, okay, you just gave us 10,000 lines of code to review. So the general software development practices apply, right? You need PRs to be tenable in terms of review effort for the maintainer of the upstream repo.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think to me, to boil it down from a logistics almost perspective, I would say that let's say we get 4 flavors of SAT. To keep it really simple, 4 different companies end up forking it and doing some variation of it. The way I'm approaching this is, well, there were reasons. Ideally, I would want the effort to go into merging all those 4 variants into one. That's what we would all want. The question is, who is going to take on this work and what are going to be the incentives to deliver that work? So the question for our forum is, well, obviously we're not going to be able to demand that. I mean, essentially this is volunteer work people are putting into the OCP community. There is value in actually tracking, at least saying like, look, we've got flavor variation 1, 2, 3, 4. They all exist. They have their own pros and cons. We may not like it. It's not ideal. They should be merged, but this is going to be on a you're going to get engineering kudos for doing it, but it's on the engineers to do it. I don't think we can demand that it be merged, and that's kind of what I wanted to make sure we're aligned on, because we don't really have a lot of sort of incentive to provide other than the guidance, right? So we can definitely write down the guidance, but whether somebody's going to do it is not granted. And so as long as we're okay with that, and we're going to have to live possibly in an environment where we have multiple variations and forks of a diag, and it doesn't give us heartburn, then we're okay.
That is expected.
Yeah.
So this discussion is more on it stopped being about OCP TV and is now about open source collaboration in general. You cannot, as a maintainer of a repo, you have no control on who forks your repo, and you shouldn't. If the entity forking the repo decides to never merge back features into the upstream, then that's their prerogative and you have no say in that. The general incentive in open source is you merge back changes that the whole community finds useful, and you pull changes from other people that have merged them into the upstream. So you get the benefit of having new code, new features from other people who also have merged their forks into the upstream one, as you should as well, to provide your features to the other people. So that's the general incentive. But if there's someone who just wants to fork and never contribute, we have no say in that.
Yeah, I want to be sensitive and not dwell too much on this one, but everything you've described so far is generally very well understood in the, as you said, the open source or even the software engineering community. The nature of the diagnostics being at the interface of hardware and software makes it such that more likely the people involved in those diagnostics will be hardware minded, not as necessarily software minded. So there is a what may seem to be sort of standard process may not be in this community as manifest. That's why I think it is worth this kind of discussion that we're having, right? Which shouldn't be happening in if this was a purely software project.
So one thing I think of is it's us as in the consumer side of the diagnostic being able to have the, let's call it the lever, the carrot, the stick, we want to call it, to get those changes merged in. So if you've forked out and you've done a bunch of development, etc., because you have a use case that's not ours, then all the power to you. Good. Thank you very much for finding our code useful. But if you want me to run your diag in my factory, it needs to be I need you to put it back in the main branch, because that's what I'm using to execute all of our workloads that will validate it, etc. So it's, I think of it from that point of view, like, and it's if you wanted to, the reason you went to it is to try to, be able to sell your widgets to the OCP community, then great that you have this diag. But if you've modified it and done your own thing with it, then I can't, for example, trust your output. So anyway, that's my thought.
Yeah, you're going exactly where in that gray territory, Marcos, in what you're saying here is that how prescriptive does the OCP TV group get around? I shall not use your fork, and I think ultimately this might end up being a bit of a personal decision. I mean, if whatever was forked was, say, from a company that is doing business with somebody that's using this diag, maybe they are going to use it. But that's kind of what you're saying is helpful, because if we do want to be prescriptive, that like, look, if you don't merge this back into our main, then we're not going to adopt your changes. That is hard to enforce, and I don't know how prescriptive we can be ultimately, but
yeah, I really don't think it's us at the OCP world. It's more me as an OCP user.
Yeah.
Who incorporated, for example, an OCP diag into my manufacturing flow from, and so I have a new vendor, and they sell me fans, and they say, yeah, here's our version of that. It's like, well, why isn't it in the main? It's like, oh, we had to do some fancy stuff in there to get our fans to spin. Like, well, it's on me to try to, like, can you please put that in the top so that I don't have to manage bazillion versions, because you're not my only supplier, etc. But if this is now coming from the Intel Nvidia thing, like a major player, and they've done something weird, and it's like, yeah, it got to see the output, but we're not merging this stuff in. It's our own very special version of SAT, and that's the way it is. It's on us to decide how we feel about that, what we do about it. But it's I don't think anything we could do in the release process, tagging process, or etc. really can enforce that, and I don't think it should.
So it's worth mentioning, these things are, let's say, generally known in the open source community. You will usually see a file called contributing in the repos, and that has like instructions. Who would you ping for reviews? Who is maintaining this repo? General recommendations. So everything that you are asking about, Vincent, would generally sit in that file. And we can make a templated file, and we can put that file in all of the repos, and it will specify all of these things. It's also worth mentioning the licensing model a bit, because what Marcos was saying, someone can just pull a code base and then do like their own custom code on it and never publish. That also depends on the licensing. Right now, we have MIT on all of the repos, and it's probably going to continue to be MIT for different legal reasons that are not worth discussing right now. But what this means is someone can pull the code and make private changes to it and never publish. If it were something like GPL, for example, you would be forced by the license to also publish, and that kind of goes a bit towards the side of actually contributing back to the upstream repo more than the MIT would be conducive to that. So just, slight tangent on the legal aspect. Okay. So I think a good conclusion out of this would be this contributing markdown file that we can put in the repos. I'm not sure an action needs to be taken right now because that is kind of expected to exist at some point. So we can put all of this in there. Anything else to add within the last 3 or 4 minutes? I will, in that case, so Rajat was not on the call today. Venkat, would you be able to talk to Rajat privately in an email or something and relay what has been discussed today?
Yeah, I've been talking to him mainly over our Slack, but I'll start an email thread too, so yeah, I can CC more folks.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Vincent.
Yeah, maybe just a point to capture around the fact that the regional summit is in Portugal, April 24, 25, which is coming up. And I am not at the moment planning to travel there, but I don't know if anybody was. And in the past, we've kind of liked having a somebody to at least walk the floor and get some feedback. I don't know if anybody is planning on going this year or presenting anything.
I am not going, but JM is, so I can certainly get him to give you guys an update if he's amenable after the thing. I think he's talking on something else with the customer.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that's it. Regional Summit 24-25 April.
Okay, then. I think we're on time for today. Thanks everyone for the great discussion, and we'll see you all next week.
All right, cheers,
Bye.
guys. Bye.
Bye.